Let's get a check of the top business news stories now. Our business editor, Kate Moody's here. Hi there, Kate.
Hi, Tom.
Now, another forecast on the economic recovery is really highlighting the risk of growing poverty and inequality. Tell us more.
Well, the World Bank's semi-annual report projects the bounce back is on track to be strong but uneven. The World Bank sees the global economy expanding 5.6% this year, a still strong 4.3% next. Advanced economies are projected to grow 5.4% in 2021, and emerging markets and developing economies 6%. But that data on emerging markets are slightly skewed because of China's 8.5% projected growth. Without Beijing, that group's GDP will grow closer to 4.4%. Low-income economies, meanwhile, forecast to expand just 2.9% this year, and that's partly because of the slow pace of vaccination there. For more, let's cross to Washington and speak to Franziska Ohnsorge, lead author of that report and manager of the Development Economics Prospects Group at the World Bank. Thanks for joining us on France 24 this evening. Let's start with the question of this uneven economic recovery. Which regions are at risk of being left behind, and what's being done to help balance that, to help them out?
Yes, with 5.6% growth, as you said, the global economy is in a recovery that is the strongest from any global recession over the past 80 years, 8 decades, in a lifetime, essentially. But it's the strongest, but it's also the most uneven. It's very much a two-track recovery, a two-speed recovery. The ones who are left behind are the poorest countries, especially low-income countries, where about 40% of the global poor live. These countries, low-income countries, spent the past decade just behind us, catching up to advanced economy per capita incomes. We expected them to spend the next 3 years falling behind at a pace of about 2% a year on average.
Franziska, on the question of vaccines, there is an effort to get doses to developing economies more quickly. Are the delays that we're seeing at the moment a question of production or distribution problems?
There's a bit of both in this, but it's quite striking the uneven vaccine rollout across the world. In advanced economies have administered about more than 60 doses per 100 people. That's almost 3 times as much as the average emerging market and developing economy. If you go to low-income countries, it's less than 1% of doses one dose per 100 people. And that is one of the reasons, not the only reasons, but this is one of the reasons of this very uneven recovery. So until the vaccine rollout has been broadened to encompass many more countries, it's unlikely that the recovery will also broaden to many more countries.
This latest report also focuses on the risks of higher levels of inflation around the world. A recent report by the UN said that global food prices are rising at their fastest pace in a decade, and that's again going to fall hardest on the most vulnerable populations.
Yeah, global agricultural prices in the last year have really rebounded strongly. And you have also seen food prices rise strongly in low-income countries. This is one of the reasons why low-income country inflation has actually moved in a different direction from inflation everywhere else. I mean, some rebound of inflation is perfectly normal after global recessions. That's just what happens. But that's after inflation declines during the recession. In low-income countries, inflation didn't decline during recession. It kept rising because of food price inflation. And that just it compounds the challenges with food security that some of these countries are facing.
What should central banks and governments and international organizations be doing that they're not already to protect workers and families going ahead?
Well, the first priority, really, for everyone at this point, is to end the pandemic. So vaccinate, roll out vaccinations to as many countries, to as many people everywhere as much as quickly as possible. That is really still the first priority. But increasingly, we're seeing now these policy trade-offs, where policymakers have to balance supporting the recovery with stimulus, and it really makes a difference to countries' recovery. There's policies report that comes. But also preserving price stability, we just spoke about this, and fiscal sustainability. So increasingly countries are facing these challenges. And then, of course, there is the foundation to be laid for a future recovery to green, resilient and inclusive growth. And that requires very difficult structural reforms.
Now, before the pandemic, trade tensions were threatening to derail economic expansion already. There are still a number of trade disputes involving the world's biggest economies. Is that still an area of concern?
Trade is still an area of concern, or perhaps to phrase it differently, the recovery, the strong rebound in trade is a window of opportunity. So it's true that over the past decade, trade growth has slowed. It's slowed because of slowing output growth, GDP growth, but it's also slowed because of this lower, about being half as responsive to output growth than it was in the preceding 2 decades. And that has partly been attributed to trade tensions, but also to just a maturing of global value chains and investment weakness. But this strong rebound in global trade that we have seen over the past year, really a record strong rebound in global trade, is an opportunity for some countries to hitch a ride on it and use trade, again, as an engine of externally driven growth. But for many countries, this will require policy action. This will require deliberate, targeted measures to make trade easier and to reduce the cost of trading. And many of them can be reduced locally, locally in addition to including international trading costs.
Franziska Ohnsorge from the World Bank, thank you as always for your insight this evening.
Thank you.
Well, Wednesday will mark another step in the reopening of France's economy. Border restrictions will be eased for vaccinated travelers from some countries. The curfew will be pushed to 11, not 9 p.m., and restaurants will be able to open indoor seating. Many cafes and restaurants have said they're struggling to find staff, although customers have already flooded back to outdoor tables. Ahead of those changes, President Emmanuel Macron has been speaking to students who hope to work in the hospitality industry. The purpose of his visit largely overshadowed by an incident which saw him slapped by a man in the crowd outside, as we have been reporting. But before that, Macron said that France's restaurant industry had an opportunity to emerge from the crisis stronger, and he encouraged them to recruit new workers.
It is absolutely essential that this be a phase of rehiring, of massive employment recovery. In the restaurant sector alone, we have about 110,000 job offers to be filled. For several years, there have been jobs that have not been filled.
Well, after being closed for more than 7 months, gyms are also set to reopen across France. Like the hospitality sector, sports clubs have received substantial government aid, but they're looking forward to getting back into shape. Marius Sofas has the story.
Installing equipment and posting signs and safety information, with nothing being left to chance. As the reopening of this sports centre in Strasbourg fast approaches, employees are readying themselves for the new health and safety protocol.
Chaque adhérent est invité à flasher directement le flash code qu'on va installer incessamment sous peu, et ça permettra en fait, si quelqu'un se déclare positif plus tard, d'informer nos adhérents tout simplement.
During lockdown, this establishment lost around 30% of its members. Personal trainers want nothing more than to get them signed up again.
On a hâte de retrouver nos adhérents, nos habitués et les revoir très rapidement et puis reprendre simplement notre travail qu'on n'a pas pu faire depuis 7 mois et demi, depuis le 23 octobre exactement, voilà.
Members too have been waiting eagerly for the reopening.
De faire du sport 4 fois par semaine avec les amis, se socialiser, faire une activité physique et se distraire, quoi. La chose la plus importante, c'était vraiment de venir et de se distraire.
Merci beaucoup. T'es motivé? Oui. Parfait, je compte sur toi.
Running at 50% capacity, all gyms are required to space out their equipment to respect social distancing. Members are expected to disinfect the equipment after each use.
There you go. Time to renew those gym memberships, Tom.
Yeah, I don't think mine's entirely expired, actually. So, well, I'll find out tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed. Our business editor, Kate Moody, thanks for bringing us up to speed. I'll be back in about 3.5 minutes. Stay with us.